What we have today is, for example, the oligarchs who control the big TV stations. They want to ingratiate themselves with the authorities, and so therefore they apply pressure on journalists, on middle management, then they in turn on journalists to not cover certain events. Say, for example, the Ukrainian famine of 1933. To belittle the opposition, to sort of portray them as divided and small in numbers, and to beef up the public perception of the authorities. And also you have things such as the security service intervening and interrogating and calling in journalists, threatening them with career problems, threatening their families, demanding that certain coverage would not be undertaken about certain events. So journalists tend to be very angry about that. That was one reason why the Stop Censorship campaign was created in May of this year by over 500 journalists. You also have persecution of a profession which is in some ways linked to the journalists, such as academics and historians. Again, that's led to joint protests of journalists and academics, because of course much of the research, when it's first published of these academics and historians, is actually published in newspapers and in the internet. He's obviously the wrong person to be in that position because he has major business interests in the media. Particularly, he controls, together with Dmitry Firtash, a major television channel, Inter, which is the most popular channel in Ukraine and is the most watched channel in eastern and southern Ukraine. And he has directly been seen to be intervening in, for example, the courts and in the National Council on Television and Radio to have the issuing of licenses to other TV channels be revoked. So 2 TV channels, Channel 5 and TVI, have had licenses revoked as a consequence of his interference. There's no question there's a conflict of interest between his business interests and those of his position as the head of the security service, where he's supposed to be at least in some ways impartial, but the president has ignored that. Well, we've already had one of those in August of this year, where an editor of a not very big newspaper in Kharkiv was kidnapped, and he's not been found since then, and it's assumed that he's dead. His newspaper covered local corruption, and particularly corruption in the local bodies of the security service, prosecutor's office, and the government. So that's already one example of somebody, of a second Gongadze, as it were, taking place only 6 months after Viktor Yanukovych was elected. So yes, that kind of thing is going to happen more in future. Why? Because if you allow to continue this kind of atmosphere of culture where journalists are under threat, where there's an indirect censorship, an informal censorship, where the head of the SBU is directly intervening in the media field, then you, in effect, in that part of the world, you send a signal to various people that anything goes, that we've gone back to the Kuchma era of 2000, 2001, where journalists are potentially targets. Yes, I mean that was clearly the case with the editor of the Kharkiv newspaper. Now, because one wonders, why was he not kidnapped and murdered under Yushchenko? But he was kidnapped and murdered under Yanukovych. So they feel that they can get away with it under Yanukovych, which maybe they didn't feel that under Yushchenko.